David with the bar. What's up with the bar?
Okay, knight f3.
You called it, James. Oh my God.
Hey,
It's on the board.
right here. COE, calculation over everything.
I tell you what, I just cannot get enough of these clips. So let's build up the moves here to the moment where James Canty freaks out. We'll relive it and then see the final climax to this game. So it's Magnus Carlsen with white, Vladimir Artemiev with black, and it's round one of their Chessable Masters quarter-final played on the 3rd of April. Let's see what happened. So d4 from Magnus, Artemiev goes d5, we see a Queen's Gambit, declined now, but the Slav variation with pawn to c6. And after these knights develop, knight c3, we see the pawn now captured on c4. And here now the move a4 is inserted, main move, to stop black from going pawn b5 and supporting that one. Now we see e6 played, e3 on the board, excuse me, and this prepares to recapture the pawn, and now here we see the c-pawn move for a second time with pawn c5. So although it's spent 2 tempos to get to that square, it does make sense here. It starts to undermine the centre and also opens up this square, possibly for the knight to develop to in some lines, plus the bishop can now come to this diagonal later, as we'll see. So bishop takes on c4 played. Now there was a capture in the centre, and here white has a choice actually, because you can take with this pawn. It is a good move. You open up the bishop, and although you've got the isolated queen's pawn, there's now some attacking ideas. But Magnus chooses a more positional approach, if you like, so he takes with the knight and keeps his pawn structure intact. And now bishop c5 was played. Both players castle and queen e2 on the board. And now because of how Magnus has chosen to play here, we don't see the knight developing to this c6 square, because white could take, shatter the pawns, and this isn't an ideal pawn structure for black. And equally, we don't see this knight captured by the bishop, because although it might look like you're winning a pawn, well, A, it's not a good pawn to win. For example, white can capture, and if queen takes back, there's big initiative ideas here. Knight b5, rook d1, big attack for white coming, black still very undeveloped. And equally, number 2, you don't even have to recapture that bishop straight away. You can go rook d1 and win back the pawn by force. You know, this is a sample line and the knight hops in. You can even support with the bishop. You know, it goes on, but you win the pawn back. So coming back here, the knight not captured. Instead, we see this knight develop to d7. And now rook d1 hits the file with the queen, so it ducks away to e7, and now this knight drops back to f3. Might look a bit counterintuitive, but in one move you have now opened up the rook's eyes, and you keep an eye on this e5 square, which could be a key pivoting point for the black knight. Now b6 from Artemiev. He prepares to develop this bad bishop, get it into the game. And now Magnus goes for an ambitious plan. So the top computer move here is pawn to h3. But not only does Magnus not play that move, but he pushes on with pawn e4. Now there are some points to this, of course. You're gaining space, threatening e5, but you have just opened up this diagonal, and black can now go knight g4 immediately. This is the engine's top move. You never stopped it with pawn h3, and you start putting pressure on this pawn straight away. Now I won't go down that line. It wasn't played. Instead we see bishop b7 first. That's why the question mark, not the most accurate as knight g4. Now e5 from Magnus. He invites the move for a second time, and Artemiev plays it. But this is the move that Magnus has in mind, and it was the response that he would have played had Artemiev played knight g4 straight away before bishop b7. So it's this awesome move of bishop g5 counter-attacking on this queen, you know, countering this threat. And if black immediately takes with check, well, you can chop that one with the queen, because when the dust clears here, well, white's actually the one ahead. This is the main line, the best way to play for black. And when you look at this position, when the smoke clears, well, we can see that white's got these 2 bishops for a rook, and that should be advantage to white. So coming back here, we didn't see this pawn captured. The computer's favourite move is queen e8, but that looks really scary after bishop b5, pressuring this knight with the rook, etc. Won't go down all of that one. So instead, f6 is played. Magnus captures. Now the knight takes back. coming away from this rook's pressure, improving itself, but in this whole sequence of play, well, now you're dropping a pawn with check. However, things are not so simple, because after these queens come off, the recapture with check, king sidesteps. Well, first you have to go rook d2, deal with some pressure here, and then there's bishop takes, pawn takes, and the knight nudges back. And although white's a pawn up, it's a shattered pawn, already pressured by the knight, defended, but black's getting this big initiative now. The rook comes, hits the bishop, it comes to that open f-file, and already you can see lots of tactical ideas in the air. So here we see the move of knight h5 played to start with. Now the computer technically wanted to take here first and then lift the rook with e5, but it's very, very complex. Don't want to go down that entire route. That was the favourite way to play, but this is not a bad move. Still good, opens up the rook to attack this bishop, and after it saves itself here, we see the knight hop back, and this invites Magnus to go for a repetition. But as David says, well, Magnus will go for a repetition when hell freezes over. You know, he loves to fight. So Magnus here, he drops back the bishop, but it's a mistake. He goes to bishop h3, and this is where a tactic is unleashed, as you can see now in this clip.
He's retreated his bishop.
Look at the bar.
Different square though. Oof, James.
David with the bar. What's up with
Okay,
the bar?
knight f3.
Oh, that's your trick. You called it, James.
Oh my God.
Hey,
It's on the board.
right here. COE, calculation over everything.
Get him off the board. 94 for the score. King G4 is king out in the middle of the street right now. And what do we do now? H5 and we live? What is this? I don't understand. H5? Nope. Knight D2. Wow.
And then
hitting
F2
pawns.
falls as well?
Oh,
You
my
just pick up the
goodness.
F2 pawn?
Oh my goodness.
So we've reached this position here. Great tactical shot by Artemiev with no time on the clock, as you can see. And although he's got two minor pieces against his rook, which would normally favour the minor pieces, here it's good for black because of the fact that the pieces aren't coordinated for Magnus and there's already pressure. So that bishop was defended, and now h5 check was played. Really nice idea, because it gives the king some room, it forces the king to capture, which takes it away from the defence of the bishop, and it gives Artemiev some time, a move, to then pressure on this bishop. Now Magnus retreats it, hits this rook, we see these ones swap off, and if you were to take back with the knight here now, well, this would show a good point to the h5 move, because now you take the pawn, hit the bishop. After the king defends, it has to spend a tempo doing that. It wasn't already on g4. Well, then you get this move in and you're winning one of these pieces. Very good for black, of course. So what we see in the game is Magnus taking the rook on f2. And now rook d2 comes back to the second rank, hits the bishop. It takes on c5, the pawn captures, and one of these ones is dropping. So Magnus saves his bishop. Then after takes here, it's not under fire, but the king has to move, jumps into g6, and another pawn drops. This is better for black, but here Magnus, he goes wrong in the time pressure. Knight e4, hits the pawn, it moves on to c4, and Magnus captures. Wasn't forced, but still, even after captures, this isn't losing, but Magnus turns it into a loss, because after this move, skewering the pieces, he retreats the knight to defend the bishop in the wrong direction. He should come to d2 here, where it can't be pinned to the king. And now, okay, the bishop is covered, black can win a pawn, but there's still a lot of work to be done here, even though black is the one with the winning chances. But what did Magnus do? He retreats this way, covers the bishop, but rook b6 ends the game. Magnus resigns. This one is dropping by force, and that's then a technical win. I hope you enjoyed this one. To see another incredible game, check out the video on screen. Thanks very much for watching, and see you soon.